Vanessa with the Latinx Center for Academic Excellence. This is an event brought to you by AS Presents and the Latinx Center, and it is an honor to bring to you Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta is a labor legend and civil rights activist who founded the Dolores Huerta Foundation and the co-founder of the National Farm Workers Association, which later became known as the United Farm Workers. Ms. Huerta has received numerous awards for her community service and advocacy for workers, immigrants, and women's rights. Among these awards are the United States Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Eleanor Roosevelt Award for Human Rights, the Eugene V. Debs Foundation Outstanding American Award, and the Orden Mexicana del Águila Azteca, Mexico's Order of the Aztec Eagle Award, and 9 honorary doctorates from universities throughout the United States. As a role model and living legend to many, and one of my heroes, Dolores Huerta has become a leader in efforts to improve the Latino, labor, and LGBT communities. It is an honor, ladies and gentlemen, Dolores Huerta.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be back here in Humboldt County and at this university. And I think it's we're here at a very crucial time in our society and here in the United States of America. And I want to thank the associated students, and I want to thank Medsha for bringing me here tonight. So let's give them an applause. With the kind of situation that we're in right now in the United States of America, I like to say to people, welcome to the 60s. Yeah, if you weren't around then, well, guess what? We're back. We're back. And when we think about what's going on, and of course one of the main things that's happening in our society is that we're just seeing a lot of very visible racism. And as an organizer, I just have to say that when you see something bad that is happening, we know a lot of us get depressed when we hear that, but you know what I say? Hey, that's an organizing opportunity. Yeah, because when something comes up that is really bad, then we know that we have to do something about it. And one of the reasons that I believe that we are now facing so much racism is because we have, and I want to say this, abysmal ignorance. Abysmal ignorance in the United States of America. And somehow, I don't know how it all happened, but somehow in our school books, we were never really taught the real history of the United States of America, the Howard Zinn history of the United States of America. And I think the situation that we're in right now is that the racism, the misogyny, the homophobia, the bigotry, looking down on poor people, that it has now become like a cancer. It's a cancer, and it's eating away at the fabric of our society. It's eating away at the values that we have in the United States of America. And so I think it's a challenge to all of us to say, how are we going to save our democracy? How are we going to save our country? And one of the first things that we have to do is start attacking the ignorance that we have. You know, there was a Spanish philosopher named Jose Ortega y Gasset. He was part of the Spanish Republic before Franco took power. And he wrote a book called The Revolt of the Masses. And what he meant by that book, it was a very small book, but this is what he said in that book. If you do not have an educated citizenry, then you will have a government of mob rule. The greedy and the powerful will be the governance of the country. And I think that's where we're at, exactly. That's exactly where we're at. And I think if we start just dealing with the racism to begin with, And I think one of the ways that we can do this, and it's not hard, is that somehow that we include in our educational system, starting with pre-kindergarten. Because, you know, children are not born racist, right? They get that from their parents. But we start teaching what the contributions of people of color have been to build the United States of America, starting with Native Americans, whose land we took and never paid for, and never honored them. And then also African slaves, you know, from Africa. Who built the White House and the Congress? It was the slaves from Africa that built the White House and the Congress, and many of the buildings in Washington, D.C. But that is never acknowledged. I remember once being in Virginia with Terry McAuliffe, who was elected as the governor at that time of Virginia, and he was saying, I am in the Capitol that Thomas Jefferson built. And I said, it was the slaves that built it, right? It wasn't Thomas Jefferson. And then we have to then include the contributions of people from Mexico, people from the Philippines, from China, Japan, from India, all of these immigrants that came here to build the United States of America. And unless we start teaching this to our children, especially our children of color, they will never have the dignity that they deserve, and they will always grow up with these inferiority complexes. I had one of those, even though I'm a fifth generation citizen of the United States of America. I remember feeling when I was growing up that something was wrong with me, and I didn't know why. And it wasn't until I went to Mexico when I saw that the pilot of the plane was Mexican. And the stewardess, and I met attorneys, and I met a lot of professional people that were Mexican, and I thought, hey, Mexicans are okay. We have to teach that to Donald Trump. And so, what happens to our white children, our Anglo children? You know, they grow up tainted with this poison that somehow, because they're white, that somehow they're superior to other people. And you see this in little children. When my grandsons was in pre-K, and a little girl came up to them and said, I'm better than all of you because I'm white. This is a little teeny kid that said this, you know? A little 4-year-old child that said this. So we know how insidious that is. And so we've got to start teaching people that this is very, very wrong. You know, that we cannot go on like this. But one of the things I say too is that when this racism, that has now exposed its ugly orange face. And people now have to identify themselves. Maybe that's a good thing about the alt-right and the neo-Nazis, right? You know, they have to now identify, people have to identify themselves. Am I a racist or am I not a racist? People have to say that they have to look into their own hearts and their own consciousness and take sides. And take sides and see what they can do to end the racism. And I think because as we say, as Al Sharpton would say, they took off the hoods, right? They took off the hoods and they put on the suits. But I think now it's going to be incumbent upon every government organization, every private organization in our country to start dealing with racism and to see what kind of amends that we can do. And the other area where racism really, really hurts our children of color is in our educational system. Right now, my organization, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, this is one of the areas that we're focusing on. We're trying to stop the school-to-prison pipeline. The school-to-prison pipeline. As I travel across the country, we find the same problem is happening everywhere. I just came back from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I just landed here today. And the same problem is going on there as is going on here in California. I live in the Central Valley, Bakersfield, California. You know, it's kind of a hee-haw land over there, Bakersfield. Well, we actually started working with parents with our community organizing work that we do. And so we had our first parent conference, and we had 155 parents. And they started telling the stories of what was happening to their children. The children were getting suspended for weeks at a time. 6 months, a year. And then we started doing the research. The current high school district in Bakersfield, California had suspended 2,100 kids in a year and a half. African American children, students, they were 580 times higher than white kids. Latino students, 480 times higher. They had 22 high schools with only one African American principal and only 3 Latino principals. So we tried to talk to them, the parents tried to talk to them, they would pay attention, so we had to sue them. We sued the current high school district, and guess what? We settled that lawsuit, and now they have to have cultural competency training for the teachers. Oh, by the way, where do they do their hiring for teachers? From Iowa, and Kansas, South Dakota, North Dakota. When you have 75% of the students in the high school that are kids of color, and you have 82% of the teachers are Anglo and white from the Midwest. So you can see where it comes from, right? So now they have to have cultural competency training, they've got to have positive behavior intervention systems, they've got to have restorative justice systems, they've got to have 1 month of African American heritage and a month of Hispanic heritage, you know. So it's a beginning, you know, it's a beginning. The other thing that we do, because luckily we're here in California, we have a law that was passed, and every single school district in California gets their money directly from the state. But as them getting that money directly from the state, they have to listen to and take recommendations from the community, from parents, and from students. And in addition, they get funding, special funding for low-income students, for English learners, and for foster children. But I don't have to tell you this, but a lot of the school districts, they just use the money the way that they want. They don't use it for what they're supposed to use it. So what we're doing with my foundation, we're organizing the parents so that they can take on every single school district. We are right now working in 7 different school districts. And because a lot of our parents, Hispanic-speaking parents, they demand to see the budget. Okay, we want to see the budget. We want to see how you're spending the money. And then they start asking a question, and they've had such great successes. In one of the school districts, they found out that there was a person getting $160,000 a year, a very small school district, mostly Latino children, and he didn't have a credential. So they went to the board. Of course, he was a friend of the board members, but they insisted that he be fired, and he was. In another school district, and this is a good one, they had almost $1 million for home studies. And one of the board members said they wanted the children to get a good Christian education. They had 62 students. And guess what? We made them drop that program also, right? So in addition to organizing the parents so they can fight for their students, we also encourage them to run for office. So in the grassroots organizing that we do, we now have several of these residents that now sit on the school board. And these are people that never went to high school, they never went to college, they speak very limited English, but they are very, very smart. One of these people that we organized in a house meeting, she became a member of our organization. We call it Vecinos Unidos, United Neighbors. So she got herself elected to the school board, and then she found out that the principal wanted to get rid of the breakfast program. He said it was too much trouble. So she got rid of the principal. She got rid of him. And then she got herself elected to a utility district, a water district. Found out that the manager that they had just hired had embezzled money from another district. So she got rid of him. Then she started looking at all the bank records and found out that there was $250,000 missing. And so she called it the grand jury. Now this is a farm worker woman, never went to high school, never went to college, but she learned the lesson of having power, right? And that you can have a voice. And of course that's what's important. And a new district that we're just going into right now, up in California City, it's up there east of Bakersfield. The suspension rate for African American students, you're not going to believe this, 81%. 81%. And so we know that so many of these kids, when they're pushed out of school, when they're expelled out of school, where do they end up at? They end up in the prison system. And so, we've got to take over the school boards, but we've also got to empower the parents. Because they want our Latino children, our African American children, to feed the prison system. They want them to feed the military system. They have these recruiters out there telling the kids, you've got to come into the Army. Don't talk about going to college, talk about going into the Army. And this racism is so institutionalized in our society. As Reverend Jim Lawson says, we have got to dismantle the systems of oppression. And they're so ingrained. They're so ingrained. But we know that we can do it, but we have to get people at the grassroots level, number one, to understand what's going on, and then to understand how we can change it, how we can dismantle the system. And I've heard that there's some stuff going on at this campus, by the way. I don't know if we all know this, people here from the community. I don't know if you knew that the Mecha group has been banned from being able to make any statements on the quad. Did you all know that? What? So I think that the administration here has got to be taken to task. And that there are many of the Latino and African American students here at this campus that when they go into the community, that they are met with microaggressions, they're assaulted, and there was one African American student here that was actually killed. And they still haven't solved that crime yet. Who murdered him? We've got to stop this. 75% of the people in the world are people of color. 75%. And when we think about the United States of America, that we are not only the leaders of this country, we're the leaders of the world. And how we deal with race also affects the way that we deal with other countries of people of color. And one of the things, I think one good, easy way to end racism is this way. Just a little bit of science that we should also teach in our schools. I think they taught it when I was going to school. I don't know if they still do. But part of science is that we are one human race. We are one human race. We have a lot of different ethnic groups. We have a lot of different nationalities, a lot of different cultures, but only one human race. And where did our human race begin? Somebody, shout it out. Africa. Africa. Our human race began in Africa. It went across the planet to Asia, came down to the Bering Strait to the Americas. One of our tribes got lost. They went way up north where it's really cold, and they lost their color. So now they have to go to the beach or to the tanning salon to get their color back. But if we can remember this, that we are all one human race. We are all Africans of different shades and colors. We are all Africans of different shades and colors. Yeah, I had my own DNA done. And I wanted to see, when they came back, I figured I was most European on my mother's side, indigenous, my grandparents from Mexico on my father's side. And so I thought, well, what would it come out? It was 60-40. 60% European, like it was 65 European, 35% indigenous. On my mother's side, it came all the way from the United Kingdom through the Mediterranean, through France, through Spain, and to the United States. And on my dad's side, it came from Peru, all the way through Central America, through Mexico. And so I asked the question, did my Africanness show up? And it did. It was 0.003. And then I asked, and then the fellow told me, he said, yeah, your Africanness showed up, but guess what? You're also 0.005 Neanderthal. And of course, that's from the European side, right? So I think if all of us, have our DNA, then we're going to find our Africanness. It's in there somewhere. We're going to find it. It's in there somewhere. So if we're all Africans, then that means